It's surprising to me that Doom, despite being one of the most influential, most popular computer games of all time that's had a huge legacy dating back to the early 1990s right up to 2020, and still producing hit games after all these years, and even having a Hollywood film and some cheaper direct-to-DVD movies, that there's such little merchandising around this property. And I think the biggest surprise for me is that there isn't more action figures. It seems to lend itself so well to the adult collector market. Horror toys tend to sell very, very well. It's an incredibly popular game. It's an action-oriented game. There's tons of monsters, so there's lots of figures that could be included in the line. And the fanbase has remained as rabid and loyal as they were back in the very early 90s. So it's interesting to me that despite this, we've only really had a couple of plush toys and some cutesy Funko Pops, until Mcfarlane Toys has picked up the gauntlet and produced a very small line of action figures to support the latest game, Doom Eternal. So today, I'm going to take a look at Doom Guy himself, and I'll see whether he lives up to the expectations and the anticipation. So first up, the packaging isn't too inspiring, to be honest. It's just black with the logo at the top there. Obviously it has that wonderful window display, so that is the star of the show. We can see the full figure on display there, which is great. And then in the bottom left hand corner we have an image from the game, so we can see what the character should look like, and his name there, the Doom Slayer. It's fine, it feels quite functional, it doesn't feel too exciting to be honest. The side panel just has an image of the figure itself, and of course the title logo there. Again, this is okay. If you're storing them on the shelf on the side, this looks fairly presentable, it doesn't look bad, but it might have been nice if there'd been some artwork from the game. And then on the reverse, again, very, very simple. We just have an image of the figure itself and the logo of Doom. So again, not amazingly exciting. It's quite nicely presented, but it would have been nice if there'd been actually some game art, because there is some fantastic game art associated with this title. Out of the box, I have to say this guy is impressive. He's such a heavy figure, so kudos to Mcfarlane for really making him so solid and giving him such a lot of weight, because he feels really strong, and the sculpt is absolutely perfect. There is such a high level of attention to detail here, it's hard not to praise Mcfarlane for this, because I think they've done an amazing job, not just with this sculpt and having all those little bits and pieces in there, but also the paint apps as well. We can see that on the boots there's not just one grey piece, there's actually like a mud wash over them as well, which is brilliant. Again, we can see it in the torso there, the way the different colours, whether it's the fleshy arm against the brown of the armour, the silver of the gauntlets, or the green of the chest plate, all looks really nice and distinct and vivid. You can see how each individual piece has been individually painted, and there's no bleed whatsoever. The helmet is a really good example of this, where we can see obviously the green of the helmet, but then there's those silver pieces and they've just been beautifully painted, and the black of the visor, just no bleed whatsoever of any of these colours. They're all separate, distinct, and they look fantastic. However, things don't fare as well when it comes to articulation. Now, admittedly, Mcfarlane aren't known for fantastic articulation, but in recent years they have significantly upped their game. And every effort is being made here to give him the articulation he should have. It just doesn't quite work very well. So his head, for example, will turn, and it does look up and down, but the joint they've used, it just feels like there's such a lot of resistance there. It almost feels like you're fighting against treacle to get it to move, and it doesn't really hold its position particularly well. Likewise, if we look at that shoulder joint, it is a ball joint, so you'd expect the arm to be able to extend out a fair distance, but sadly it just doesn't budge very far. You now have to rely on the elbow articulation, which of course is only a single joint, and it only bends to 90 degrees, and even then it's not a huge amount of distance that you're getting out of that arm. And then again in the wrist, he does have a swivel there, so his wrist can spin 360 degrees more or less when it doesn't rub up against the gauntlets. And it is supposed to have a hinge, so the joint is there. He should be able to arch his hand backwards and forwards, but he cannot. He does thankfully have that pivot in the chest though, in the upper torso, which is fantastic, so you can get a lot of movement out of him in the upper torso. Likewise, he also seems to have a bit of a ball joint in the waist as well, which is fantastic, so between the two you're able to move him to a lot of different poses. He does have that hinge at the hip, so he can kick his legs out at a really good distance there, which is fantastic. He can kick them forward very, very slightly and hardly back at all, which is a real shame. He does have single jointed knees as well. Again, it can bend to about 90 degrees, it's not a huge distance. He also has an ankle pivot, which in theory are just like the wrists in the sense that they should be able to have a great range of motion, but in real terms they don't. So practically he cannot really bend his foot too far or move it from side to side as he should be able to. For accessories, he comes with his wrist blade and his super shotgun. And these both look fantastic when you give them to the figure. The wrist blade fits perfectly into the gauntlet and it looks fantastic and it feels very solid. There's no danger of it dropping off. Likewise, the shotgun fits perfectly into his right hand. His finger goes through onto the trigger there, which looks brilliant, and it looks really solid. Again, the paint apps are wonderful, and it looks like a perfect replica of what we see on screen when we play the game. So yeah, I think they've done an amazing job of this. My only nitpick is, for a game that boasts so many weapons, it's a shame that we don't have a few more. Now I appreciate it's great that we've managed to get 2, but maybe an extra gun would have been really, really cool. He does of course also come with his shoulder cannon though. This is articulated, so it just slots in nicely to his back, and it can swivel around in various different positions and rotated so that it can be pointing at a particular enemy, I suppose. This is a nice little addition, so top marks for this, although it does feel a lot weaker and a lot cheaper than the rest of the figure, so be careful with it. The figure does stand at 7 inches tall, and he's quite a beefy, heavy figure as I've mentioned before, so when you put him next to another figure, like say a 6-inch Marvel Legends figure, in this case Spider-Man, you can see he really towers above him. And he can hold his own against many a Build-A-Figure from that series too. So here he is against the Ironmonger figure from a few years ago, and yeah, I mean they look like they could go toe-to-toe, to be honest. And finally, here he is next to the Mortal Kombat Spawn figure from the same line, Mcfarlane Toys. Again, this looks really healthy, and yeah, they look in perfect scale to each other, so 2 thumbs up. Now so far, the only other figures in the line are a couple of variants. We have this gold variant, and we also have the Doomicorn variant as well, which is based on some DLC. Make what you will of this. I'm not overly interested in either of these, to be honest. For me, I want what I see in the game, which is the classic green costume, so I'm not really worried about these other variants. But they have released a Marauder figure. This is great, because this is the first time we're seeing one of the villains of Doom made in plastic form, and he's one of the major antagonists that you encounter throughout the game. He's one of the major bosses, and then he reappears several of the times, so he's a difficult villain. He's very distinctive. He was made especially for Doom Eternal, and he stands significantly taller. He's in scale with Doom Guy, or the Doom Slayer, and he's roughly about, I think, 8 or 9 inches tall, so he's quite an impressive one, but already he's become quite scarce and quite pricey and difficult to pick up. So, final thoughts. I think the presentation of this figure is absolutely fantastic. I think the paint apps, the mould, the sculpt of it, I just think all of it is really, really good. Like, there's such a lot of attention to detail, and for that, you know, it is a very, very strong figure indeed. I think for me, one of the problems that lets it down is the articulation. So although there is a good attempt to give it plenty of articulation, I just don't feel that it's very practical, and it actually doesn't work that well in truth. After playing around for a while, this is the most dynamic pose I was able to get him into, which is not bad by any stretch of the imagination, but the articulation that has been built into this figure should allow it to do a lot more than it actually can, and for that it definitely loses stars. And I think my other complaint with it would be that we don't have enough accessories really. I mean, yes, we've got the super shotgun, which is great. I do love the wrist blade, and of course the shoulder cannon is cool, but something else that would have been more distinctive from the game would have been really cool. I don't know whether it might have been the assault rifle, or, you know, in a perfect world the BFG, but of course that is quite a bit of plastic would be needed for that, so I can understand not getting that. But one of the other weapons is kind of iconic, would have been really cool to give him. And so overall, yeah, this is a 3-star figure for me. I think it is really well made. I think if it was more of a statuette kind of thing that McFarlane are well known for doing in their early days, then I think it would be absolutely spot on. But obviously I do feel like that things have changed in the market. I feel like McFarlane, the company, have changed, and they have embraced a lot more articulation, and I feel like we should have been able to do more with this figure than we actually got. It is all compromise. I appreciate that he's a really solid, well-made figure, but ultimately if he just kind of stands there on the shelf, it feels a little bit redundant. So I want to be able to put him in different positions, and really I want to have more figures in this line. I would love to have like an Imp or something like that to have him properly fighting, but yeah, maybe in time we'll get that. I hope you enjoyed the vid. If you did, please do give it a like, and remember to subscribe, as I will be posting more videos soon.